and the very legal laws and the police to enforce, allowing you to have that laws, that could be a very dangerous proposition, especially depending on where you live. Go through Central Park at 2 in the morning, So only by restricting other people's rights do you have that right to partake in something like that. I thought that was an interesting concept. We only have rights by limiting other people's.
But actually, I think the best thing is not to go walking in Central Park.
I carry, so I don't mind.
They're talking about using the federal government to help our local police with our violent crimes, for example. And the concern is that Alaska's rates are so high of violent crime, but all of the violent crime, for the most of it, are in places where I simply wouldn't go myself at those hours. And so I can imagine, that a lot of people outside of the state who know me are wondering, gosh, how are you surviving in such a violent state? Actually, where I live, I can go outside my house at night and walk around because I'm the only one there. But basically, that kind of thing. Actually, in the certain times of the year, I would have to worry about bears and things of that sort.
And I'm gonna, since we're all kind of off on that topic, I'm just gonna throw it out there. A lot of the statistics for this state, are contingent upon the rural bush community. And those aren't even ruled underneath the same rules, because there they can banish you without due process, among other things. So it's like,
well, they do have due process for their community. The elders get together and say, "We've had it with you. You're out," that kind of thing.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's not without due process. It's what am I going for?
Constitutional due process.
There you go.
It's tribal process.
But again, they agree to live there, so they're up to it.
So what's his concern then? The government of each by himself. It's not the government of each by. So having this liberty doesn't mean that you can make the government do exactly what you want it to do. It's not each by himself, but of each by all the rest. The will of the most numerous, or the most active part of the people, the majority, are now the ones who kind of rule the whole process, right? And so, consequently, they may desire to oppress a part of their number. Certainly. In fact, I was thinking, good quiz question today is, what law would you make if you had the choice? It was totally up to you. Could you enforce, that it could be enforced, that you would have your, a law that would be especially the kind of thing you would like. And as you're thinking about that, would it be oppressing a particular class of individuals here? Doesn't any law insist on certain things being followed by everyone? But mostly what you're having in mind, I think, is a specific group of people that tend to do these kinds of things. Sitting in your car in the Walmart parking lot smoking pot, or something. That'd be the first thing I'd think of.
I call that a Tuesday. I'm kidding.
Tuesday?
I have heard of that.
But so, like other tyrannies, the tyranny of the majority, you've heard that expression, was at first and is still vulgarly, right, held in dread. Vulgarly, remember the Vulgate is the common translation of the Bible, right? The Vulgate. It's in the vulgar. The vulgar is just the language of the commoners, right? Now we use vulgar. Don't use that vulgar language with me. We use that expression basically when we talk about people saying words like fuck and things of that sort. call that vulgar, right? But actually, the word vulgar is referring to just the language of the commoners, as opposed to the elite educated that wouldn't use those kinds of
Would
words.
be Greek or Latin, maybe Hebrew.
Well, not necessarily, but just they're not using words that are, you know, thought of as, you know, guttural, common, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What's the base of the word though? Of vulgar, I mean, is that Greek or?
I believe it's Latin. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Entomological.
I'm just used to you throwing that out as well, so.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Hadn't thought of it. In fact, I hadn't thought to mention that, except that I underlined it, and as I'm reading it, and I saw vulgar, you know, and this is 1859, so his use of that would be very different than what we're actually saying now.
Yeah, it's Latin.
Stands for the common?
Of or pertaining to the common people, common, vulgar, multitude, crowd, throng.
So further down the page, he says there needs protection also against the tyranny of the prevailing opinion and feeling for liberty, right? You see this feeds into what would be really the libertarian opinion, that the government should be restricted to enforcing laws that are really aimed at protecting the safety of individuals, keeping you from harming other people, and not imposing its restriction on people just because some people feel like that's wrong for people to do. I'm absolutely sure that he's not concerned at all with things like gay sex or, he's a very, none of those issues were the kinds of issues that we get, you know, upset over today, not part of what he was concerned with.
So anything past that, you know, protection of laws and defense is essentially would be construed as just like social justice, social programs. Essentially what he's saying is that government should have any play in that at all.
Well, oddly though, he was a proponent of laws that would help the needy. But not too much. But keep in mind that a contemporary of his in London is Karl Marx. I mentioned Charles Dickens, and his literature is primarily aimed at encouraging the upper classes to think of ways to improve the lot of the needy, the impoverished. The Scrooge, Scrooge should not be treating his employees that way. You know, he should be giving them the turkey, or helping the little boy. What's his name?
Tiny Tim.
Tiny Tim, right? That kind of stuff. And of course the things that are going to scare him is remember the ghost of Christmas Future, right? Is what scares him, because he realizes that once he's dead, no one's going to remember him. Even his own family aren't going to love him, etc. Right? Because he is such a miserly asshole, right? If you want, to have your loved ones remember you, then what you ought to do is share more, etc. Right? I think I mentioned Hard Times, another novel by Charles Dickens. The main character there, I've heard, is probably a metaphorical or allegorical individual representing Thomas Malthus. And the interesting end of that book is that the overbearing miser ends up losing his own family to the same things that he says it's fine to happen to other people. They're not working hard to take care of themselves, but just nature taking its course, and then his own family ends up suffering as a result. And so what goes around comes around, So Charles Dickens, but Karl Marx is arguing that what we need is a communist revolution, to get rid of capital, right? Mill is actually, in the middle. He's upper class. He's not extremely wealthy. His father was an important member of the British India Tea Company. Is that right? Did I get
India company?
East India Tea Company, and Mill was an employee of that himself for many years, although he never went to India. But I mean, he ended up once he retired, he moved to the Riviera, French Riviera. One of the individuals that came to visit his house when he was a kid was Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian. I think I've mentioned Jeremy Bentham was honored by the British with that's him. It looks like a little phone booth, but remember that's his dead body with a wax face. His real face is on the floor. That's not going to help. So there's his real face. The eyes must be glass. But
Is there a reason they mummified him?
he required in his will that the Royal Society continue to have him attend every meeting. Oh, I didn't tell you this? Yeah, so they wheel that case into every meeting and they sign him in as an attending member. But so Jeremy Bentham, the official founder of utilitarianism, was a frequent visitor of the house, the Mill house. And when John Stuart Mill was the elderly one, a frequent visitor was Bertrand Russell when he was a young man. So there's an interesting physical tag team going through some of these British philosophers too. So he's well enough to do that he's the upper class. He's upper class. He's not a rich noble or anything of that sort, but he's definitely well-to-do. And he feels that certain rules, and he in fact does help establish certain rules to help the poor. He's also a scientist, by the way, so he's especially working on logic. So Mill's logic is Mill's methods. You think about, so here they are, the main ones that, so doing induction. For years since Aristotle, educated individuals had deductive methods available to them. All through the Middle Ages, those deductive methods actually were explored and expanded. But deductive reasoning, like math, only gives you answers that are based on the premises that you already have. So in a sense, deductive reasoning doesn't lead to new information or to new ideas. It's just a way of figuring out what you already know implies, right? But with inductive reasoning, you learn new things. But it's a guess. And by the way, all guesses could be wrong. So inductive reasoning is invalid reasoning. In other words, it's not deductively valid by definition, right? But most science is induction, right? Oh, if I do this, this happens. Wow, so I assume that this will always do that. Well, but it might not. That's, of course, where we get the, what's his name's book, Black Swans. Taleb, sorry. So Taleb, black swan theory. So basically an inductive argument is a guess, a hypothesis. So if, the stock market's prices going up and down is basically a psychological issue, as long as the press is positive and affirms that the stock market's going up, then people will believe it and keep investing, and the stock market will go up. But if somebody leaks out, wow, it's all fake, nothing's really based on fact, et cetera, and all of a sudden enough people believe it, the stock market goes down, and that looks like, whoa. And of course, it's more complex than that. There's all sorts of things going on involved in this. Taleb made a fortune, by the way, in the crash, and that drew everybody's attention to him because he basically gambled that a lot of these stocks were going to crash, and so he took out hedge funds on them and won, because of course they did crash, so they all paid off for him. But so Mill gives us ways of improving our inductive reasoning. The closest that we had to an improvement on that was Francis Bacon, that gave us what was called the new tool, the novum organum of Mill. So novum organum. The new tool by Francis Bacon. I remember Francis Bacon was Thomas Hobbes's teacher, but it didn't really have that much of an impact, at least historically. But Mill's methods did. So by the time we get to Mill, we've got the Industrial Revolution going full tilt, and a lot of scientists developing things. Remember, they didn't actually have state-sponsored science. The science that was done was mostly done by wealthy people that spent their own money on their own interests. So that's pretty interesting.
That's where they formed like their little societies.
Yes. So and the Royal Society, of course, was their club, basically. But if you look up the metaphysical, or no, philosophical breakfast. Laura Snyder, that looks interesting. But this is the book I'm thinking of. And the four individuals that this book highlights, these four, 1, 2, 3, 4. Charles Babbage, rhymes with cabbages. He's the one that invented a calculating machine that never really was used by the government, and so that was funded by the government. So this is the turning point where it moves from private investments in your own scientific equipment for your own lab in your own house, where you do your own experiments and then write about them and share them with your friends in your club. It becomes a point where the government is actually funding a particular project, and so on. So John Herschel, William Whewell, and Richard Jones. So this is about the same time. But Mill's methods gives us things that we think of as commonsensical today, that if you have a cause and then effect multiple times, that there must be an agreement, and that method of agreement will tell us that this particular cause is the cause of that effect. If, on the other hand, something is missing and so we don't have the effect, well, it must be the thing that's missing is the cause of that effect. Right? That's the method of difference. A stronger method is the joint method of agreement and difference. method of residues, where we're basically looking to see what things are left that must be then the cause of the effect. Concomitant variations is one of my favorites because I like the phrase concomitant variation. It sounds fun. But basically that's when this goes up, then this goes up, right? You know, and as this goes down, then this goes down. So cause and effects and that sort. He's also famous for requiring that the restrictions be put on these kinds of experiments. So it has to be repeatable. You know, if you tell me, oh, I've made a fusion engine, you know, how? Oh, don't worry, you won't be able to do it. well, yeah, I'm not going to believe a word you say unless I can make my own. You know, it has to be repeatable. You know, I remember, you know, and doctors especially can, you know, be doubtful. I remember the Australian doctor that determined that ulcers were caused by a bacteria. And they were like, no, it's, you know, when you have too much acid from being upset about this, that, or, you know, the diet, etc. Heck, I had a grandfather that was operated on ulcers. I had a father that lost half his stomach because of ulcers.
There was a guy who swallowed the bacteria that he thought was causing the ulcers because he couldn't test on anybody else but himself, and he got ulcers and then fixed it.
So did you pick that up in a class, or?
No, that's just random.
Just random. You were walking along the street one day and oh, it's on the tree.
No, it's something I've found through random searches
Cool.
over time. But yeah.
Me too. I mean, this happened during my lifetime. You know, and remember, thinking, oh, this is ancestral. I'm going to get ulcers. So I was always worried about worrying too much. Because if you worry too much, you get ulcers. So I worried that I was worrying too much. Which, you know, that in my way of thinking, you know, is it's like a trap.
Forgetting what you're supposed to remember. I knew there was something I was supposed to remember, but I can't remember what it was.
And I don't even have a remember-all, which, you know. Oh well, that's, sorry, I'm in Harry Potter now, I've got to get out of it. It's worse than a foreign language even, if you're trapped in one of those. Okay, so Mill's methods. So this is, you know, other things he does. So he's involved in a whole bunch of things. You know, this is still back in the day when it seems like the intellectuals did everything. They were interested in everything, so they studied everything. He was also interested in religion, was absolutely convinced that religion was bad for us because of all the wars and things that it causes, and so he believed that it should be replaced with a state religion. So, you know, we should have holidays that are state holidays as opposed to holy days. Well, it's still holy, but instead of being, you know, in honor of a church function, instead it should be celebrating a national, you know, historical event. You know, like Independence Day. Yeah, let's have July the 4th. You know, everybody celebrate July the 4th. You know, it's a religious holiday, except the religion is the state religion, not Easter, you know, or something. You know, or we have Memorial Day, right? Or Veterans Day. You know, we should have holidays that encourage people to think more highly of the community. You know, because you need that. You need that kind of sense of community. That's one of the functions that religion served, as far as Mill was concerned. But we don't want the trappings of the ancient religions because they have bad effects. So what we want is a new religion based on our state community, right?
So that's exactly what they did in the Soviet Union and North Korea. They
Oh, right,
celebrate
right.
Founders Day.
Right.
You know?
Well, Marx is part of, you know, this community thinking about these same issues. The mention he has of Auguste Comte, which is on page 577, the right of spiritual domination, Monsieur Comte, in particular, whose social system as unfolded in his book, The System of Positive Polity, aims at establishing, though by moral more than by legal appliances, a despotism of society over the individual. And that's really closer to what Marx incorporated in his state communism. Was that? So for Auguste Comte, showing up at the political parade to wave the flag was not voluntary. Where Mill thought they should be voluntary. So your bosses don't come around and make sure that you're at the parade waving the flag, for the politicians, for the Girl Scouts, for the military band, etc. We don't do that. We follow Mill, whereas some places, France tried to do this, I guess, because Comte was he's a French philosopher. But communism especially, you see all those people out there waving the red flags exactly the same way. North Korea, it's absolutely mandatory. You don't say, oh, I don't like them. No, you don't show up, you're in prison.
Got a camp for people like you.
Exactly. You haven't been trained, obviously. So, funny little dig. This is Mill, who's clearly a philosopher, page 573. He says, the belief by some who aspire to the character of philosophers, that their feelings on subjects of this nature are better than reasons and render reasons unnecessary, the practical principle which guides them to their opinions on the regulation of human conduct is the feeling in each person's mind that everybody should be required to act as he, and those with whom he sympathizes. So our feeling, I think, is natural that if they don't agree with us, they're wrong. We have to somehow get used to the idea that we can't impose our views on other people. We have to, for liberty's sake, we have to allow them to have their own point of view. And that's the feelings of the class as well, the superiority of the feelings of the class. I heard, I think it was on TV talking about the Chinese today feel like Confucianism is the better philosophy instead of our Western point of view. And it's like, can they be right? Can a Confucianist philosophy of running society be better than ours? Wow, should we open our minds to that as a possibility? Page 574, yet so natural to mankind is intolerance, and whatever they really care about, that religious freedom has hardly anywhere been practically realized. Well, that's actually wrong for us from here to read, because we really feel like we do have religious liberty in our country. Remember, that's the heretical imperative. You don't have a choice. You have to be a heretic. This is terrible, isn't it? Okay. So, the principle, this is page 575. It's all in italics. The principle is that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So it's not really the liberal point of view today, even though he's inventing the liberal point of view in this text that obviously has changed. This is today more what I would call the libertarian point of it is perhaps hardly necessary to say that this doctrine is meant to apply only to human beings in the maturity of their faculties. So I wonder, what about like my son Christopher? He's not really capable of making good decisions, because of the fetal alcohol, right? So time and time again, he'll get money and he'll just blow it on, drinks for everybody, that kind of thing. Or somebody asks him for the money, he'll give. He got a hold of his permanent fund one year when he was at Chugach High School. Somehow he knew that the permanent fund had been deposited. He had his account, right? That's where it went. And of course, we didn't even think of this. He'd never taken money out of his bank before. He went and he took out the permanent fund money, took it to school, walked out under that area where they have like the little tunnel thing where a lot of the bad kids hang out, and people asked him for the money and he gave it to them. So it was gone, his whole permanent fund that particular year. We ought to be able to control the kinds of things he could do. And, as you're reading this, if the only thing we can restrict is his harming other people, giving away his money is not harming them, right? But this line, I thought, helps, right? That this doctrine is meant to apply only to human beings in the maturity of their faculties. Well, Chris could never be considered to be mature in his faculties.
Well, and I kind of took that line up like a different way, because I thought it was because they're the ones that have agreed, because they voted to be part of they've agreed to the social contract, to live within society's rules. We can't hold kids accountable for electing Trump because they didn't vote or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So if they're children or they're not capable of voting, they're not held accountable to the same rules the rest of us are, which is essentially the truth. Kids can run crazy and do things and say things that I can't, like old people.
Yeah, but I'm thinking in terms of,
yeah,
you don't let your kids go off and do stuff.
It'll be harmful to them or others.
Yeah. So, as an adult, if you decide you want to go out for a walk, you certainly can. Right? If, you're the parent, though, and it's your 5-year-old, right? Where are you going? I'm going out for a walk. No, you're not. And you drag the kid back in the house, right? Or what? So that's how I'm reading this, and of course I'm trying to apply that also to Christopher. That's been one of the most frustrating things. If we had more of a social control over individuals that are clearly not capable of making their own good choices, if we had that kind of, but we're like adamantly against that for some reason. We want people to make their own worst choices. That's their freedom, right? Can't lock them up because we know that they're going to do something.
I'm sorry. Bill talks about that as well. He's like, we can plead, we can beg, we can persuade, we can do whatever under the sun, but we can't compel.
You guys all enjoying this discussion? I don't want it to seem like it's just Phil and I having a good conversation.
Sorry,
I loved your point, though. That was good.
I have a problem with what you said.
In which?
You wanting to be able to control the social aspect of people who are deemed
Mentally.
not socially acceptable, I guess is what I was understanding it as. Where do mental illnesses fall within that spectrum?
Well, that's exactly, I think, when I'm bringing up Christopher, I'm thinking, he has unofficial mental illness. It's been diagnosed as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and he's been tested so that, there's specific things that he will not be able to do this. His reflexes are not good, for this, that. And as I'm learning this stuff, he was already an adult by then, and I'm hearing all this stuff and I'm realizing, that's why. That's, so many things are being explained, right? this is not his own personal characteristic, that's a mental
Physiological.
issue resulting from this. And, you know, in a sense, it's a shame that our society won't allow the community to restrict the freedom of individuals that we know have this kind of limitation. Instead, we basically allow them to fail over and over again. And then, you know, and then we get upset because, well, you know, then we've got, you know, facilities for them, and it makes a mess out of the whole community, you know, and it just enables them to continue making these wrong decisions, and it's very expensive to do that. You know, and it seems to me, why can't we philosophically get over? So is that what bothers you, that I'm suggesting we ought to have some kind of social controls over people, you know, that we can identify, okay, they need this kind of help. So we should, in a sense, set up some kind of camp. Where they-
That should be our next question.
That was kind of what I had a problem with, just because I guess, you know, there's a lot of people out there that would argue that people who have attempted suicide before need to be, you know, policed.
Right, right.
But there have been people who have attempted previously in their past multiple times, and yet they still are able to function as normal adults.
Mhm.
They're able to function as normal human beings in society. They just had a patch in their life where they weren't able to, or where they didn't see it going any further. So should we police those people as well?
And
But that's a different scenario. I see the similarities, but being in a depressive state of mind for suicide is not the
It's
same
not
as
a
having an
depressive
actual
state
mental
of mind,
illness. Well, if
I
it's
mean,
not
a
a
good
temporary
majority of
state of
it.
mind, if it's a continuous one, then it is a mental illness and they should be policed. However, if it's not, if it's just a rough
Well,
patch in their life and now they're over it,
most mental
they should not be.
illnesses-
It's a different scenario.
Most mental illnesses are continuous.
Then yeah, they should be policed.
I read philosophy whether I'm required to or not. And I could imagine my parents way back then wanting me to be put into some institution to keep me from reading philosophy. You know, that would have, especially during my Kierkegaard days, you know, that's suicidal. But I suppose the decision of our society overall is to follow Mill and to not impose governmental restrictions on people unless. And now, we will put someone in API and tie them up until they get over it. Christopher's been there, so I'm aware of that. In fact, I know other people that have been through that sort of thing, and you know, some come out and phew, they're all better. Pro tem, you know, might require medication, and you might be concerned about making sure that they are taking their medicine, because you know what can, right? I mean, you stop that medicine, and it all comes back, maybe. Who knows? So it's very complex, but it's also so frustrating that we have all these people that we know for sure cannot, and I've got to shut up. So good quiz question, I forget what it was. Anybody remember what it was? What law would you like to, maybe that would be the one to, you know, how do you control people that you know are going to do the wrong thing?
Was there more to the quiz question? Or is it just what law?
What law would you create?
It says,
Yeah,
like, keep in mind what groups, and what groups you would be oppressing.
Yeah, because I'm assuming if you create a law, it's going to oppress the people that don't want to follow the law.
Then they're criminals.
At that point, they become criminals, yeah?
What's funny is that this is the conversation that needs to be had after every one of these mass shootings. Because what you always end up with is anti-gun, pro-gun,
and then it never boils down to anything.
But it's the mental illness
Is
of
the
the
cause-
person that
causal
they're out to
factor.
shoot
Usually.
other people.
Terrorism.
I don't know.
Mental illness.
You say, have a good weekend.
I'm trying to think of another way to argue, but that's.
Well,
Get
because
well.
after every mass shooting, like anytime there's talk of gun control, the NRA like blows a gasket, like they're gonna take away all our guns. It's like, no. Seriously, like just more in-depth background check. All you really need, and maybe like you have to have a recent checkup every 5
Well,
years.
you know,
See, mental checkup?
Paddock,
Yeah.
Paddock,
Ah, so now you want to restrict rights based on mental illness?
They're actually talking about that, there's a series.
Every
talking
year,
about
yeah.
it.
They talk
And
about it all
they
the time.
keep moving forward with that, actually.
that looks
Heard-
very interesting.
Did you paint that?
Define paint, because I really just, I
It's like a
took,
drip
Paint
paint.
on something?
I took a bottle of tempera paint and just kind of squirted it on there and then
It's worth
Tap
$1
the
million.
bottom.
I would say, are you going to get a grade for it?
I
That it's
am
art?
going to, actually. It was not.
All right. Take care, sir. Thank you much.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. And we'll get to work on grading those papers.